Right now, the war is reaching a new level. Russian troops in Belarus. A march on Kyiv? Shock. Crimea is in the crosshairs of the Ukrainian armed forces. Russian air defense can't save them. Russia's defense industry is burning from Stavropol to Yaroslavl. The Kremlin is in a panic. The launch of the nuclear Burevestnik is a catastrophe. The killer missile is on the launch pad. Last chance or a new war? Here's what's really at stake in Alaska. Putin is being cunning. Trump is unpredictable. Europe is sounding the alarm. Tensions are rising. Protests against Putin in Alaska, a split in the EU, and China's secret game. What's behind the upcoming Trump-Putin summit? The bunker dweller is in a panic. The Ukrainian armed forces are advancing. These images are blowing up the internet. Russia's rear lines are burning. Zelensky promises to stand until the end. Sensational! The US war machine is picking up speed. Ukraine is about to receive massive armaments. The West is speeding up deliveries of deadly weapons. This is a new stage of the war. All this and more in our program, Hotspot. Shock! Shock! Russian troops are already in Belarus. Is it just exercises, or is the Russian army preparing for another breakthrough? Kyiv is in the crosshairs. Crimea is on fire. Russian air defenses have been exposed by Atesh agents. The enemy is moving equipment onto the peninsula. A powerful strike by the Ukrainian armed forces is coming soon. Russia's defense industry is burning from Stavropol to Yaroslavl. The Kremlin is in a panic. Watch all the explosive details in the following report.
At around 3 in the morning on August 12th, Ukrainian drones struck the monocrystal chemical plant in Stavropol, Russia. Local residents heard 5 explosions, after which a fire broke out at the facility. City authorities claimed that the UAVs were suppressed by electronic warfare and the attack was repelled. However, the thick plumes of smoke tell a completely different story. The chemical plant is a key producer of synthetic crystals, which are used, among other things, in the manufacture of weapons for the occupying army. In Yaroslavl, Russia, a paint and coatings factory caught fire during the night. The fire engulfed 4,500 square meters, causing the building's roof to collapse. The fire was assigned an increased 3rd level of difficulty. The enterprise produces paint and coatings, including special coverings for military equipment. Bloomberg reports on successful strikes against Russia's strategic facilities, as a result of which they cease operations. Thus, the Russian oil refinery in Saratov, owned by PJSC Rosneft, stopped receiving oil after a drone attack on Sunday, August 10th. Meanwhile, the situation on the front lines of the Russian-Ukrainian war remains dynamic. The Deep State Analytical Center reports that in recent days, Russian forces have intensified their advance toward Dobropilya, in particular attempting to gain a foothold near the Dobropilya-Kramatorsk highway.
As of today, our valued European partners and the United States of America have made a very significant and good delivery to us this month of essential long-range artillery systems, high-precision munitions, and crucial long-range missiles. Therefore, we are holding steady in a strong and active defense posture.
On the opposite side of the front, the Ukrainian armed forces are advancing. The Ukrainians have liberated 2 villages in the Sumy region, Stepne and Novokonstantinovka.
The Kursk direction. In the Sumy direction, our small tactical groups successfully carried out a comprehensive reconnaissance in force operation. They managed to capture several key enemy strongpoints, including various VOPs and ROPs, and also took a limited number of prisoners. Currently, they are effectively holding that newly established line of positions. Furthermore, they have also, let's say, decisively pushed forward, successfully broken into the enemy's primary defensive line, and significantly advanced the front line a bit further.
It seems that the fewer successes Putin has at the front, the greater his ambitions become. The first Russian units have arrived in Belarus to take part in joint exercises, the active phase of which is scheduled for September. We're talking about several hundred Russian servicemen and a couple dozen pieces of equipment.
They will now be conducting reconnaissance and holding large-scale exercises, including maneuvers into the territory of the former Baltic states. Their comprehensive plan is to seize control, secure their gains, and effectively draw the entirety of Europe into, let's say, extensive and protracted negotiations, specifically aimed at compelling them to completely withdraw their substantial support for Ukraine. And accordingly, I truly think that Vladimir Putin will be issuing his own significant ultimatums regarding the strategic placement of NATO military bases in certain specific countries, particularly those bordering Russia.
Meanwhile, as Putin Napoleonovich continues to conquer more and more territories in his own mind, Russian women have decided to fend off drones using bells, foil, and cardboard. They called this innovation Trench 25. It's a simple device designed to create a directed sound emission capable of interfering with the operation of unmanned aerial vehicles. The inspiration for this miracle came from the Russian church, or more precisely, its leaders, who claim that the sound of church bells is better than drones.
War or peace? Trump, Putin, and the unpredictable scenario in Alaska. Europe warns, no concessions to the bunker dweller. How will Trump respond? Who will outplay whom? The stakes are higher than ever. Shock? Putin's entourage against the Tsar. The Kremlin is pushing for negotiations. Who will come out on top, and what price will Ukraine have to pay? Find out more in our report.
There are only a few days left until the historic meeting between the presidents of the US and Russia in Alaska. The summit, which no one expected to happen so soon, promises to be a turning point in the Russia-Ukraine war. But is that really the case? Europe has already warned, pressure on Moscow must not be eased. Kyiv categorically refuses to make any territorial concessions. So what is this? A chance for peace, or just another game before even greater bloodshed?
It is highly likely that the negotiations in Alaska will reveal significant differences in the positions of the US and Russia regarding the terms for ending the war and Russia's willingness to agree to a ceasefire. The idea of a partial or phased ceasefire may be discussed, where initially an agreement could be reached on a ceasefire in the air. The idea is being discussed, but it's also unclear whether Putin will agree to it or not. A quite possible scenario is that the parties may agree to start negotiations on a ceasefire. This could be a kind of concession from Putin. The war will continue, but the negotiations will not just be about some sort of conditional peace agreement like in Istanbul, when it was clear that the parties had completely opposing positions. No, now the specific topic of a ceasefire will be discussed.
Neither Ukraine nor Russia will be satisfied with the results of a settlement of the war brokered by the US. However, negotiations are worth the effort even if they don't work out, says US Vice President J.D. Vance. He noted that, in his view, ending the conflict looks very difficult.
If you take the current line of contact between Russia and Ukraine and try to find some kind of settlement through negotiations that would satisfy both Ukrainians and Russians, where they could live in relative peace and the killing would stop, it still wouldn't make anyone particularly happy. Both Russians and Ukrainians will probably end up dissatisfied with this. But I don't think you can sit down and hold these negotiations without the leadership of Donald Trump. J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, in an interview with Fox News.
Europe, in turn, insists that any territorial issues must be discussed exclusively with the participation of Ukraine and its European allies.
In recent days, there have been intensive consultations at all political and administrative levels. Today, I will have another phone conversation with President Trump. We are actively preparing at the European level, together with the US government, for this meeting, and we hope that the Ukrainian government and President Zelensky will take part in it. We cannot accept that territorial issues between Russia and America are discussed or decided without the participation of Europeans and Ukrainians. I hope that the American government shares this view. That is why such close coordination is taking place.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's ambassador to the US, Oksana Markarova, says that Washington will not give in to Moscow. We truly hope that this pressure from President Trump, the sanction packages that are on the table, and the secondary sanctions that have already been imposed on everyone helping Russia will convince President Putin that it is finally time to stop his aggression. However, the behavior of the 47th president remains unpredictable. A week before August 8th, everyone was expecting new sanctions against Russia. But Donald Trump made a sharp turn and announced a summit with Putin. The White House's position remains unclear. Hypothetical options for territorial exchange were discussed, but the details are unclear and contradictory.
According to American sources, Trump is primarily interested in reaching an agreement on a ceasefire. Everything else comes after that. Therefore, if Putin refuses to make any specific agreements, well, that could trigger a new crisis in relations between Trump and Putin. Trump's irritation may only intensify. You know, once Trump was disappointed in Putin after several months of fruitless phone conversations, and now it would be the second time. This would already be perceived, as if you were simply blatantly betrayed. This could cause even greater irritation for Trump. But Putin wants something else. Putin wants to restore Trump's trust. That's why I think that, after all, Putin will propose various cunning intermediate arrangements where there will be some formal concessions, but in such a way that these concessions are not very acceptable for Ukraine. As I already said, Putin's goal is to redirect Trump's anger and irritation toward Ukraine so that Ukraine appears to be at fault for the failure to reach any peace agreements.
Meanwhile, a split is brewing within the Russian elite. According to the New York Times, Putin's entourage is increasingly dissatisfied with the ongoing war against Ukraine and the harsh totalitarian regime in the Kremlin. Among those who are not afraid to voice their opinions is Dmitry Kozak, one of Putin's longest-standing allies. It was Kozak who urged the Russian dictator to start peace negotiations. Kirill Dmitriev, the main negotiator for the bunker, is also looking at the summit with optimism.
The pseudo-conservatives and other warmongers will not be smiling on August 15, 2025. The dialogue between Putin and Trump will bring hope, peace, and global security.
While the whole world is searching for ways to end the war, in Russia they continue to rely on their favorite methods of spreading fakes. The Kremlin is ramping up disinformation, accusing Kyiv of not wanting peace, blocking negotiations, and lacking transparency in prisoner exchanges. And Russia's main mouthpiece, Vladimir Solovyov, has even started saying that after the summit, the war in Ukraine will not end, and is hinting at new conflicts, for example, in the South Caucasus.
It's time to win. To victory. Not just pretending there is no war like what happens in society, where on a Friday night you go out in a big city and you think, what's even going on? Is there really a war going on somewhere? Yes, there really is. And it's a terrible war. And this needs to be understood very clearly. And unfortunately, for everyone, it won't end with a meeting in Alaska. That also needs to be understood. At the same time, we also need to realize that what is happening in the South Caucasus is a very big problem. And soon the Caspian could find itself in a situation where NATO bases might appear there. And this is so dangerous that from a geopolitical perspective, it could lead to consequences such that this might not be the last special military operation of our generation.
In my opinion, the negotiations in Alaska are not the end. It's more like the beginning of a new stage in the negotiation process. When and how it will end, there is no answer to that question yet, and I think we won't get one right away.
The Trump-Putin summit will take place in the city of Anchorage, Alaska, a place with special historical and geopolitical symbolism. According to the New York Times, the U.S. Secret Service has already rented a 6-room house here for the leaders' negotiations. At the same time, the question of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's presence remains open. Whether he will become the third participant in the historic negotiations will be known on August 15th.
Shock! Americans are protesting in Alaska. A new wave of confrontation with Russia is gaining momentum. The EU supported Ukraine ahead of the meeting of the century. Orban is sabotaging with an "it's none of my business" attitude. I don't know anything. China is changing the rules of the game. A secret conversation between Xi and Trump before the summit in Alaska. You'll be the first to know all the details.
US President Trump made a slip of the tongue twice, saying he was flying to Russia to meet with Putin. Dissatisfied residents of Alaska are preparing protests in connection with this under the slogan "Alaska stands with Ukraine." They are against the arrival of a war criminal.
I'm going to see Putin. I'm going to Russia this Friday. It's going to be something grand. We're going to Russia, and it's going to be very significant. And what happens, you'll be the first to know about it.
But I think this is a very serious slip of the tongue that could have offended representatives of this American state.
Putin, in his excitement, continues to call the leaders of so-called friendly countries and boasts about his meeting with Trump.
This, of course, is yet another element of Russian propaganda and diplomacy. And once again, this particular situation will undoubtedly hinder any further significant steps to effectively isolate the Russian dictator from the international community.
Trump's position regarding Russia has softened again. He is counting not only on meeting with Putin, but also on persuading him to meet with Zelensky. Trump also, in effect, once again accused Ukraine of starting the war.
I was a bit concerned by the fact that Zelensky said he needed to get constitutional approval. He didn't have approval to start the war to kill everyone, but he needs approval to start a land swap because there will be a land swap. I know this from conversations with Russia. The next meeting will be with Zelensky and Putin. I will be there if necessary, but I want to arrange a meeting between the two leaders.
The nuance here is that we allowed the war to happen in the first place. In other words, this is a classic Trump criticism of the Ukrainian authorities and President Zelensky personally. We've heard this repeatedly. But the fact that Trump voices certain pro-Russian narratives, well, that's a fact.
And here's another extraordinary statement. Trump said that he consulted with Hungarian Prime Minister Orban regarding the Russia-Ukraine war.
I asked, can Ukraine defeat Russia? Orban looked at me and said, what a silly question. Russia is a huge country and they've conquered their territories through wars. They're constantly at war. That's what they do. He said, China will defeat you with trade and Russia will defeat you with war. That was a very interesting statement. That was a very interesting statement.
Once again, this shows the sources from which Trump is directly getting his information. We clearly understand that Orban is not someone who supports Ukraine's success. And this means that it is necessary to have more productive cooperation and communication with Trump through all possible channels.
Another Putin ally, Slovak Prime Minister Fico, also commented on the upcoming meeting. But the attempt at discreditation seems to have failed again.
Do you remember the old African saying that I love to repeat? It doesn't matter whether the elephants are fighting or mating, the grass always suffers. No matter how the elephants' negotiations end on August 15th, the grass will suffer. In this case, it's Ukraine.
Pentagon Chief Hasnt stated that thanks to Trump's actions, Putin is feeling the pressure.
President Trump has already changed the rules of the game. He has created the conditions for a possible peaceful settlement, which was his goal from the very beginning, on a very complex battlefield. I don't think Putin would have agreed to a meeting if he hadn't felt the pressure. And this is our chance. During the negotiation stage, there may be, and likely will be, territorial exchanges and concessions. No one will be satisfied. But if anyone can do it, it's President Trump.
At the same time, Trump still isn't putting pressure on Russia's main partner and has once again postponed, for 90 days, the increase of tariffs on goods from China.
We have a good relationship with China, as you've probably heard. They pay huge tariffs to the United States. Well, we'll see what happens. They've behaved quite well. I have a very good relationship with President Xi.
There are no problems with democratic India, but with autocratic China, where the Communist Party is in power, there are certain nuances. We see the same thing with Russia, where there are 0% tariffs. It's the same situation with North Korea, where there are 0% tariffs. So this actually shows that Trump doesn't have a consistent policy on this issue.
Before the meeting in Alaska, the leaders of the European Union published a joint statement in support of Ukraine. Polish Prime Minister Tusk stated that the US promised to consult with its European partners before meeting with Putin.
The Russian authorities must know that the West, including European countries, will not accept Russia's demands, which in fact amount to the seizure of Ukrainian territories. The American side has committed to consulting with its European partners and hearing their position before the meeting in Alaska. I have a lot of fears and hopes regarding this meeting, because President Trump, I would say, is very skilled at using the tactic of unpredictability.
From Trump's perspective, communicating with European leaders is not about obtaining additional information or coordinating actions. No, it's about gaining a veneer of legitimacy and support regarding the outcomes of the upcoming meeting in Alaska. But from the perspective of the European leaders themselves, and from Ukraine's point of view, it's still a chance to get through to Trump.
Indeed, it is difficult to predict the outcome of the meeting in Alaska. But the positive fact remains that Europe is interested in its own security and will not leave Ukraine without support, no matter how things turn out.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Russia is once again brandishing its nuclear club. The killer missile Burevestnik is back on the launch pad. Putin is raising the stakes. A new nuclear weapons launch could change everything. Fear is sweeping over the West. The consequences are unpredictable. All the shocking details, watch right now.
Russia is preparing new tests of one of its 5 types of wonder weapons. We're talking about the Burevestnik missile, which has been dubbed the Flying Chernobyl in the US. all because of its nuclear engine.
The missile is dangerous because if the reactor is destroyed, if it's shot down, or if it crashes or has an accident, a quite large area will be contaminated. And no sane person wants that. That's why the Americans abandoned this environmentally unfriendly project back then.
Nuclear weapons expert Decker Eveleth drew attention to the fact that the Kremlin is preparing to test its no-analogs weapon. According to him, this is evidenced by increased activity at the Pankovo test site on the Novaya Zemlya archipelago. In addition, the possibility of tests is also indicated by the fact that the US has sent an Air Force radiation reconnaissance aircraft to Novaya Zemlya. This aircraft is equipped with sensors for monitoring nuclear tests. Later, the SVIG noted that the aircraft took off from the British airbase Mildenhall and circled over the Barents Sea for about 14 hours.
If it explodes, it will contaminate everything around it. That's why, as soon as the Russians start talking about planning some kind of test and begin actively flexing their wings over there, an American reconnaissance plane or a radiation level monitor is immediately sent to that area, starts circling, and records everything that's happening.
The development of the Burevestnik began in Russia back in 2001. However, it was only in 2018 that Putin publicly announced it. He did so with great pomp, claiming that its range was unlimited and its flight path could be unpredictable. During this time, Russia tested the Burevestnik 13 times, and all attempts ended in failure, although one of them is actually considered successful. That time, the Russian wonder weapon managed to fly as far as 35 kilometers.
Out of 13 launches, all were unsuccessful. One launch, when the missile flew 35 meters, 35 kilometers in 2 minutes. And this is considered the most successful launch because they were able to record all the parameters they wanted to capture. There is also a theory that when the major accident happened in Neonoxa, that accident, the disaster in which people died and there was a significant radiation release, was connected. One version is that it was related to this Burevestnik missile.
Putin didn't pull the Burevestnik out of his nuclear arsenal for no reason. This is yet another tool for intimidation.
There's a whole frenzy being stirred up around this. Russia is portrayed as terrifyingly large, incredibly powerful, with tons of weapons and 5,500 nuclear warheads, though no one really knows what condition they're in. But aside from burst, probably no one knows. And now the deadline for Trump's ultimatum is approaching, so something needs to be done. That's why airspace over Kapustin Yar is being closed off, so that everyone starts wondering what will be tested there. Will it be the Burevestnik missile or something else? And the whole world gets tense. Then they announced that there will be new tests of the Burevestnik missile or something else again.
Can the Russians conduct a test of the Burevestnik? They probably can. Will it be successful? In Russia, they'll say yes. But as the statistics from previous tests show, only the Russians themselves are likely to suffer from this launch.
An explosion at the front. The Ukrainian armed forces are tearing apart the occupiers in the Kupiansk direction, a breakthrough and counteroffensive. The Ukrainian armed forces are doing the impossible. Russia is frantically redeploying its forces. Ukraine and Europe are preparing a strike plan against the Kremlin. Shock! Putin wants new territories. A tough response from Zelensky and Russia's rear ablaze. Watch all the fiery details from the front right now.
Under the pretext of a possible ceasefire, the Russian army is actively moving columns of armored vehicles, tanks, and manpower to the front. Judging by the published videos, the occupying forces' equipment is heading toward the Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk regions. According to military experts, it is precisely there that massive assault operations by the Russians may take place in the near future.
At present, the degree of implementation is far from, let's say, the set plans, thanks to the heroism of our defenders. But as for pieces of territory, they might say, let's exchange these pieces of territory. We will completely leave the Kherson and Kharkiv regions, and you please hand over to us what we have written into our so-called constitution. Pieces of Donetsk, parts of Donetsk, half of Donetsk that remains, about 30 to 40%, half of Kherson and half of Zaporizhzhia region. That kind of conversation could take place.
The Russian dictator is also putting pressure on Ukraine at the diplomatic level. Despite not having much success on the front lines, Putin still hasn't given up hope of grabbing more and more pieces of Ukraine for himself.
He wants to trade a pause in the war, in the killings, for the legalization of the occupation of our land. He wants to gain territorial spoils for the second time. He was allowed to take Crimea, and that led to the occupation of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. He did not receive a preventive punishment when he amassed troops on our borders. This led to a full-scale war and the occupation of even more parts of Ukraine. Now Putin wants to be forgiven for seizing the south of our Kherson region, Zaporizhia, the entire territory of Luhansk, Donbas and Crimea. We will not allow this second attempt to divide up Russia. Knowing Russia, where there is a second time, there will be a third. That is why we stand firmly on clear Ukrainian positions.
If Putin does not want peace, he must be made to want it. That is exactly why Ukraine and Europe have presented their own plan to end the war. As the Wall Street Journal writes, the first stage of any settlement must be a ceasefire. The plan also states that any exchange of territories is only possible on a mutual basis. In other words, if Ukraine withdraws its troops from some regions, Russia must withdraw its troops from others.
First, there must be an honest end to the war.
First, there must be an honest end to the war, and it depends precisely on Russia. It is Russia that must end the war it started. Second, Ukraine and all its partners still recognize the necessity of a ceasefire, of stopping the killings. There is only one party opposing this, Putin. His only card to play is the ability to kill, and he is trying to sell the cessation of deaths at the highest possible price.
He wants to make the cessation of deaths as expensive as possible.
At the same time, according to Western journalists, European officials insist that any territorial concessions from Ukraine must be backed by strong security guarantees, in particular, the potential membership of Ukraine in NATO.
What is needed is not just a pause in the killings, but a real and lasting peace. Not a ceasefire sometime in the future, months from now, but immediately.
And while the truce has not yet come, the armed forces of Ukraine continue to drive the occupiers from our land by force. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the armed forces of Ukraine are counterattacking and have been successful in the Kupiansk direction for the second day in a row. According to geolocation maps published online, the Ukrainian armed forces recently repelled enemy attacks and advanced to the southwest of Kondrashivka. At the same time, in a report the day before, analysts stated that the Ukrainian side had also advanced to the southwest of Rodkivka, which is north of Kupiansk. In addition, our defense forces have liberated and completely cleared the settlement of Bessalefka in the Sumy region. According to the General Staff, the operation involved units of the 33rd Separate Regiment and the 24th Separate Assault Battalion. As a result of the operation, the enemy suffered significant losses. Meanwhile, the occupier is already close to semi-encircling the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration, military analysts unfortunately report. In the Radinsky area, the enemy has advanced a good 4 to 5 kilometers. The main fighting is now taking place near the railway on the Dorozhne-Radinska stretch.
Geographically, the military formation is not yet encircled, but the logistics have been almost completely cut off, and bringing anything in or taking anything out is practically, well, it's becoming impossible.
The Russians also tried to break into Pokrovsk itself. Out of 150 occupiers, only about 30 made it to the city. But even they ultimately achieved nothing. Nevertheless, military experts do not rule out that the Ukrainian armed forces may be forced to leave the city if the occupiers' onslaught does not subside. However, for now, there are no signs of this, and our defenders are bravely repelling the enemy's assaults.
If it turns out that we absolutely have to leave the strategically important city of Pokrovsk, then an extra 2 or 3 crucial days or even a full week of our brave troops valiantly staying within the city limits, followed by a carefully planned and executed withdrawal, is simply not strategically justified or militarily sound. Over the course of a year of fighting near Pokrovsk, a significant amount of enemy manpower and equipment has been destroyed. One could say that Pokrovsk has already fulfilled its military mission several times over. So let's approach this calmly. In war, sometimes you have to retreat in order to move to other positions where it might be easier to hold the defense. No gates are being opened, no open spaces where the Russians can make significant advances, nothing of the sort.
However, things aren't going so well for the residents of Erefia either, over there beyond the curb, to put it mildly. Russians, like Ukrainians, are getting used to living under constant shelling. But unlike the Russian army, the Ukrainian armed forces strike exclusively at military targets, not at civilians like Putin does.
Drones attacked Saratov region.
Russians are widely complaining about explosions and a fire in the regional center near the local oil refinery, which became a legitimate target for the drones.
Oh God, help us. We almost couldn't get any sleep.
According to Russian media, a whole series of explosions, about 8 in total, went off last night over Saratov and Engels. Russians claim that air defense systems were supposedly operating and flashes could be seen in the sky. However, the burning oil refinery is clear evidence of the occupiers' poor air defense performance.
Something really intense is happening over there. Oh my God, holy shit, this is truly unbelievable.
Temporary restrictions have been imposed on arrivals and departures at Saratov airport. In addition, the governor of the Russian region announced the threat of repeated drone attacks.
A missile apocalypse for the Kremlin. Washington is preparing deadly weapons for the Ukrainian armed forces. The occupiers are in a panic. The West is uniting and arming Ukraine to the teeth. The US and Europe are pouring billions into the Ukrainian army. Long-range missiles in Ukraine's hands are a nightmare for Putin. The end of the bunker dweller is near.
Almost $500 million for the purchase of American weapons. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark are allocating $486 million for the purchase of overseas defensive weapons at NATO's initiative. The aid will be provided under the new prioritized Ukrainian requirement list initiative. Assistance under POREL will ensure the rapid delivery of weapons and equipment to Ukraine to strengthen air defense, in particular the purchase of missiles for the Patriot system. This summer, we have witnessed Russia relentlessly continuing its illegal attacks against Ukraine along the front line and against civilian targets and cities. With this contribution, we aim to facilitate Ukraine's rapid access to the necessary equipment while also strengthening NATO cooperation on Ukraine's defense and ensuring peace on Ukraine's terms. Tureos Sandvik, Minister of Defense of Norway. The Netherlands has already funded an aid package of similar value, and in the near future, several more such packages will be provided under PEARL. These aid packages include support for air defense, ammunition, and other essential equipment. Each aid package will have an estimated value of $500 million. In parallel with this initiative, the US has approved the sale to Ukraine of maintenance services for the 777 howitzers worth more than $200 million. The agreements consist of 2 contracts. The State Department has decided to approve the possible sale to the government of Ukraine abroad of equipment, repair services, and operational support for M777 howitzers and related equipment, totaling about $104 million. The Defense Security Cooperation Agency has provided the required certification, notifying Congress. The deliveries will include technical assistance, training, instructions, and other elements of logistics and support. The main contractor will be BAE Systems UK. The second contract provides for the provision of transportation and logistics services to Ukraine. The government of Ukraine has requested the purchase of transportation and cargo consolidation services to support security assistance programs as well as other related elements of logistics and program support. The total estimated cost is $99.5 million. The proposed sale will help achieve the foreign policy and national security objectives of the United States by enhancing Ukraine's ability to defend itself. The administration of US President Trump is also considering the possibility of supplying Ukraine with JASSM cruise missiles for the F-16. The first JASSM missiles have a range of about 370 kilometers. More advanced versions are capable of striking targets at distances of up to 1,000 kilometers. The JASSM entered service in 2003 and combined limited radar evasion capabilities with a high level of targeting accuracy and a warhead payload of 450 kilograms. Currently, this missile is operated by 4 countries, including Poland, which received 110 for its F-16 fighters. Other Cold War era fighter jets in service with Ukraine, namely the Su-27 and Su-24M inherited from the Soviet Union, have already been modified to launch the British and French cruise missiles Storm Shadow and Scalp, which have some comparable characteristics to the JSSM. And although Trump himself stated 2 weeks ago that he is not considering supplying Ukraine with long-range missiles, sources in the White House claim that this issue has been under discussion for quite some time. And as we know, Trump changes his mind very quickly.
That's all for now, and for more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.